We got three talks, intimate crowd here. You guys raise your hand, throw whatever you didn't eat at lunch. I understand that the brownies and the drinks are going to be there. If you, not a lot of us, so party on. 3 talks this afternoon. We're going to do wind, we're going to do solar, and somewhat of a fun discussion is kind of getting our crystal ball on and what's going to happen with the fuel of the future. And for those of you that haven't heard, we've got a Prius and a Nissan Leaf that are going to be outside. And so I'm going to try to keep that one real tight, and we'll go outside, and my guess is if you wanted to, you could take them for either of them for a ride. But that one, I do want to say that one took me a lot of time. I'm not an expert in transportation. I have some of my best friends are transportation researchers, some very, very, very leading national people, and I spend a lot of time talking with them. But it's an incredible phenomenon that's happening in that area. So I surprised myself on some of the stuff that's going on in that whole arena. And largely I'm referring to natural gas, by the way. And there's a strong push to go back to compressed natural gas. And you know, it's an interesting argument. We'll get into that. And so anyway, but for now, we're going to do some wind, we're going to do some solar. So first on the wind front, what energy solutions are blowing in the wind is the title of this. Most of you look like you might recognize the song that was very popular, protest song. I don't know how many of us looked like that back then, but could have been a few. And it's interesting that wind has kind of fits that environment of desire then, but very much a reality today.
I noticed a little pen. He was still looking for a handout.
Yeah. Some things. Yeah, some things don't change. You know, and you know, the big heavy on wind right now is you know, right now, unless somebody does something, and it doesn't appear that anybody on our political front, at least federal, can do anything, the wind is going to expire at the end of this year unless renewed. And so there's a big concern with that. And for what it's worth, all of the other incentives, the geothermal, the solar, et cetera, carry out to 2016. And so that's, wind is doing so well. I don't know, and in fact, you know, where we sit, if we want to be somewhat parochial, we're not in a wind zone. We're not in a very, you know, so what's happening when federal incentives encourage wind, well, what does that do? That makes TVA go buy wind that's generating power in North Carolina, and then we got to pay and maintain and rape the earth to get the transmission lines to us here. And so in essence, in one sense, we're just sending our money to other parts of the country, and there's enough of that going on. So I don't know if we should, you know, again, I'm being somewhat parochial here, you know, from Tennessee, if we should be so saddened that some of these things are going to back off. But there's some big opportunities in the southeast, and I'll touch on them. But offshore wind, I think, is going to be big. And if you can make them hurricane resistant, I think we've got some pretty decent. I'd just as soon sit on the beach and look at that than some of the other stuff that would be displacing. So of course you know Buffalo Mountain. How many have you guys ever taken a trip up there? This is just outside Oak Ridge. Buffalo Mountain, there's a couple of wind turbines that are actually, it's really interesting. It's in an area, if you ever go hiking, you know, it'll be a day where there's no wind anywhere. You go up there and your hat's blowing off you. It's just one of those little microcosms. And so when people say, there's no wind here in Tennessee, there is in places where there's little venturis and stuff like that in the mountains. You're up against that beautiful vista, no sign of man except for this puppy, and many people don't concur. But you know, to me, yeah, I like it. It's magical. It's if you ever drive up to from just north of Indianapolis, a huge wind farm. And when those things are just kind of lazily, you know, it's hard to keep the eye on the road. It's just kind of magical, and it's, you know, just very soothing. They rotate very slowly, etc. I got to be a little careful with this, but and this doesn't quite fit what my messaging here, but I think the idea was, you know, we tried to do some wind here locally, and the rethink on that was, yeah, it makes kind of more sense to buy it and wheel it back in via transmission lines. And I don't know about you guys, how close you've been tracking this, but our transmission infrastructure in this country, you know, one could say, thank God for the recession, you know, that slowed the demands on that, because it is very much in need. I mean, we talk about the roads. Well, transmission is very, very vulnerable because of its being pushed, and there's more and more of this wheeling of power going on. And so, you know, having to rely on more and more on long-distance power, which is somewhat the issue with wind. Where the wind is, people aren't. This is a really good little internet video that I thought I had. Okay, if you just excuse me, this could be just a quick.
We've all seen those creaky old windmills on farms, and although they may seem about as low-tech as you can get, those old windmills are the predecessors for new modern wind turbines that generate electricity. The same wind that used to pump water for cattle is now turning giant wind turbines to power cities and homes. Okay, have a look at this wind farm in the California desert. A hot desert next to tall mountains, an ideal place for a lot of wind. Here's another one on the windy prairies of Wyoming. Now, today's wind turbines are much more complicated machines than the old prairie windmills, but the principle is the same. Both capture the wind's energy. Okay, here's how it works. First, a wind turbine blade works sort of like an airplane wing. Blowing air passes around both sides of the blade. The shape of the blade causes the air pressure to be uneven, higher on one side of the blade and lower on the other. And that's what makes it spin. The uneven pressure causes the blades to spin around the center of the turbine. On the top, there's a weather vane that's connected to a computer to keep the turbine turned into the wind so it captures the most energy. Now the blades are attached to a shaft, which only turns about 18 revolutions a minute. And that's not nearly fast enough to generate electricity by itself. So, the rotor shaft spins a series of gears that increase the rotation up to about 1,800 revolutions per minute. And at that speed, the generator can produce a lot of electricity. So, why are wind turbines so tall? Well, the higher up you go, the windier it is. More wind naturally means more electricity. And in many cases, larger turbines can also capture wind energy more efficiently. The blades can sweep a circle in the sky as long as a football field. Now, what's really cool is that even a small wind farm, like this one in Wyoming, can generate enough electricity to power more than 9,000 homes. And larger farms can provide much more clean energy for our homes and businesses.
That was actually not the video that I was going to show you, but there's another cartoon, and they must have just changed their website or something. But that gave us a little bit. In essence, I guess of what that was just telling you, and I kind of wanted to just show the basics of how that we take that wind force and convert it to turbines, and this is specifically, and they could vary, but the ones that we do have here in Tennessee, just a little bit outside up in the mountains near Oak Ridge, is it actually steps the power up to 35 kilovolts, and then stepped again. And then this is the 161. That's what much of TVA's transmission lines. That's the voltage that's just distributed at. So I guess there's about 15 of them there, and as far as I know, that's pretty much it in Tennessee. And these, but kind of rules of thumb, we need at least 10 miles per hour, and this is for average. But where the state of the art is trying to get useful generation at lower miles wind speeds, and of course a big concern is what happens when we get hurricane winds and too fast of winds. Will it be able to stow itself and not be damaged? When we talk about the ratings, and these tall units are generally coming in at about 2, they're pushing them a little bit higher, 3 megawatts, and then they string them together, and that's kind of what you're seeing when you see a single large wind turbine. They want to shut themselves down before they damage themselves. I don't want to get too ahead of my story, but the one that I had intimate familiarity with in McKinney, Texas, I don't know where you were living, but that's where Walmart had one of their experimental stores. Right in the middle of the parking lot, they had a intermittent, like a small 50 kW unit, and it didn't stow properly. And it wasn't Katrina, but the one that came in, the hurricane afterwards, hit that directly. And without it stowing properly, and by stowing the blade will just go into the wind and then equal forces on both sides, and it'll stop it from turning. It didn't do that. And I'm there wiring up the store, and you could see this unit, and I think it's about 20 foot, this great big, above a Walmart store, swinging 10 foot this way and 10 foot that way. And it was just a powerful memory of there's, as benign as wind seems to be, there's some pretty serious concerns when you have a lot of mechanical parts that have to work properly.
Did that fly apart?
It did not. It did not. But I'm gonna jump. But I'll tell you that we got about 40% of what we were hoping. This was a Berkeley, which is kind of an old, established. The gentleman that did a lot of the patents on this stuff, that's the firm that he came with, and that was who was talking with Walmart. I'll get into the Walmart story. It's just fascinating, the various things that I had done with them starting from the 1999. Like I said, heavy work right now. The state of the art is trying to make these where they're actually generating power at very little wind speeds, and there's some pretty good innovations. Electronics is enabling us to do that. And so one of the things I kind of felt is that even though we're in a state that generally doesn't have a great basic wind source, these innovations may open it up to everybody, even in very, very low winds. So, I don't think it should be, and we all tend to do this, solar's good, or wind's bad, or coal's bad and gas is good. You know, you got to keep an eye on the technologies as they evolve. Big concern that a lot of people had, and this was at first, interference with television, radio, cell phones. A lot of these are actually cell phones, cell phone towers, because of all the non-metallic that's in them and the brushless rotors and things of that sort. So this issue that was there for a while is, and by the way, Owens Corning, who is a client of mine, makes a lot of these blades, and it's not exactly fiberglass, but it's very, very similar reinforced epoxy. So they're non-metallic, and that's kind of why they're not an interference where some of the first ones were. Some of what I'm drawing from comes from this report. That's from the Department of Energy, and it talked extensively, and of course, we're all about the jobs right now. There's a very large, in fact, you know, this says 75,000, but the arguments in Iowa were that Iowa alone, and this might be the indirects, the job numbers were in the 55,000. So it's maybe not, this might be just those that are actually working on the turbine, but jobs mean there's a spillover to, you know, the burger stand next to the wind farm. I don't know. I just hadn't paid attention to this, and it used to be. I thought, well, wind was just, you can only do so much, and then it's so disruptive to the grid that you can't go any further because of its intermittent. But that obviously is not the case, and some of these slides are going to show you that. But this shows the incredible ramp up of the capacity of, and look, I mean, we were hardly doing in these last couple of years. It's been absolutely phenomenal, the growth that's occurred. When we talk about small wind turbines, and these are not necessarily the bigger ones, these are under 100 kW. So bigger ones, as I said, were like 2 megawatts. You know, these are very small. These have had pretty nice growth as well for the last 5 or 6 years. And you can see the capacity additions and kind of mirroring the total that I just showed you in that previous slide. So you know, a lot going on. Reason, obviously, and strong is, you know, not only federal incentives but state incentives, and the under 100 kW you actually have an uncapped federal investment tax, and you know, I said shutting off, but I think on the books it's 2016, but is it the Republican, you know, want to cut it off at the end of this year or something of that sort? Yeah, so I think that's what I was referring to. But all of these are going till 2016, the incentives for both solar and then USDA for farm applications. There was a very nice grants that were available that encouraged a lot of that. I don't know, maybe you got, it sounds like you're very familiar, you knew what was going on with wind, but this surprised the dickens out of me. 35% of the new generation capacity has been wind. I mean, you kind of think of all the big coal-fired power plants, and gas is so cheap, surely we're throwing up combined cycle power plants in great numbers, but here you got it. Here's gas. Here's what we've been, you know, pretty consistent for the last 5 years. And here's on the same, we're not talking about a different scale here. You know, here's the wind as percentage of total. So, I mean, it's like 31, but you know, it's pushed, for a couple of years, it pushed over 40%. That just, you know, surprises me. As I've kind of kept half an eye on this, I always knew Denmark was a leader in, and it used to be, I don't know where this came from, but it was one of the, 20% is all you can do. And then it just gets to be too much, you know, out of sync and intermittent and jolts the grid. You can't go higher than that. Well, think again. You know, Denmark is heading strong. They're already at 29%, and this is kind of also shows growth. So you can see Denmark's been in there real early, real strong. They were, and like I say, I think some of this was this belief that you couldn't go much further, but obviously the outlying years, they certainly have. And the U.S. Remains right in here. And what are we at as far as total, you know, wind generation? It's something in the neighborhood of what, 3.5%. used to be able to hear lots of wonderful, brilliant people come through. And I remember one present at the lab when I was there, they'd have these interesting seminars. And this gentleman came in and said, North Dakota is all we need. If we put in a windmill, every place that a windmill could fit, that's all we need. And that was kind of interesting. And as you see this stuff unfold, as long as they can figure out how to get it, transmitted, it's amazing the basic resource that's there. This again is a website that you can go to, and it might be fun to hit it, but you love stories like this. I mean, here, buy into a wind farm, and 8,500 people said, hey, I like the idea, and bought in essence stock, and then kind of the same people were somewhat impacted by the fact that not too far off the shore there's going to be all these windmills, and oh, by the way, this is a money-making tourist attraction, the Little Mermaid. Several of you may have been there. It's within sight of that this thing, like I say, kind of, if you will, kind of everyday citizens kind of pooled their resources and went and put this together. And not nearly as well along, but here in Georgia, the city council, and again, it's been controversial. It's big time been fighting off the shores of New England about the aesthetics issue of wind farms. But here, as a first step, the city council actually encouraged the continued thinking and path towards doing something like this off the shores of Georgia. And like I say, I think if somebody really has done all the structural, and they're certainly doable. These rigs, these big oil rigs that are less, you would think even more vulnerable, that are not fastened firmly to the bottom of the ocean, are stable enough to withstand hurricane winds that those can be done, and they could be set up and withstand those storms. That this is a pretty attractive option in light of all the externalities that occur with everything else. I suspect you've seen many of these. 80 meters converts to 260. So yes, as you pointed out earlier, these things are a football field in height. That's to the center of those blades, and as you had indicated, it's quite a bit further than that to the tip of the top. And then these colors. So the blues, the reds, the purples. These are Heartland. These are the real. There's your North Dakota. And as you can see, we're down in the average, and these are meters per second, but it's just relative. We're somewhat wind resource starved, little bit better going on Memphis and such, and a little bit of activity that we got. And what people will argue is that the resolution is not good enough on these, and that in the hills there's some potential opportunities that don't get reflected in these big maps. So I attempted to then go and see if, with a little bit finer resolution, yes, indeed. So back to the scale here. In this case, we're going the other way. So the reds are pretty good. And so there's pockets along the North Carolina, Tennessee border where maybe. Just another look at it. You see the valleys that we're in are about as bad as it gets. So, having just shown you that, one might be surprised to see that TVA's biggest renewable energy source is wind, at least will be wind. And this is these purchases that they picked up from Midwestern Wind, and the agreements to wheel this in. And so when this gets online, this will be something like 4.3% of TVA's. This number varies a little bit from time to time. I know they're going to retire some dirty coal-fired power plants. They've just added but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 megawatts of peak all-out capacity that's here. And there's been some really interesting conductors and efficiencies in the transmission, and this is kind of using the latest and greatest of that. But as of now, this high voltage line is still not there, but it hopes to be here by 2015. So these are contracts that TVA has already signed. This is outside the windshield. It's coming through from crying about the Packers getting beat by San Francisco Monday and going through central Illinois, and you see these wind farms. The scene right now is wind is really in the state of flux. Big issue of the renewal of the after 2012, and that being the big debate. So these are smart consulting and people that have models and plug-in incentives and what's the effect of incentives. So there's a set of these that when it comes to predicting what the future is on the whole country, these are scenarios, as I think they would be called, that say we're going to expire, which is a real issue being debated, the incentives in the end of this year. And these are various extensions. So when you look at the 9 to 13,000 megawatts of added, and then you look down here, there's some that are pushing 24. So without the incentives, will the market fall out? No. Will it be yet less? Absolutely. And here's where I stand, and I've got to be careful with this, but you know, the whole goal of all of these incentives are just to equal the playing field and get the inertia going, and then they're all to be phased out. And Japan kind of is the place where we looked where that happened with solar. The incentives were very high. Attention, don't wait because they're going to go to nothing. And that built the capacity, and one would argue that in a perfect economy that doesn't have recessions, that's not a bad thing to do. I'm going to show this afternoon that Germany kind of bet on that. They developed enormous solar generating capacity, and then, well, China took the whole market away from them anyway. You know, so there's a lot of risks and justification of those incentives. I can't tell you how many smart people around me at Oak Ridge that would try to deal with this externality issue. And you know, should we leave this all up to free market? You know, it'd be disastrous for the climate if we were. Okay, should we incentivize? Should we tax? You know, it's really tough to come to a good balance and of how we can level the playing field to really give things like wind its justification, but not give too much. And it's like I say, a major question that a lot of people invest in, largely economist type folks, to try to get a handle on this. And so I've tossed out kind of some factoids, if you will. And a big one is, and it's kind of started from a couple of different studies, but Harvard Medical School is the biggest one. Impact on health. And health, and now that we're going to have more kind of national health plan, this becomes even more important that we don't do things that actually increase our health bill. So this has gotten to be a more realistic and concerning issue of what is the external cost on our health of wind versus, you know, say coal. And so this comes up with an incredible number of $500 million dollars a year in environmental costs due to coal, and $5 billion in essence is not accounted for in the price of electricity. That's a huge number that is not in the price. And as you see people talk about taking CO2 and injecting it into the earth, and getting our fuels from tar oil, you know, this takes a lot of CO2 and such. And so, you know, how to truly get good numbers here to decide what should be incentives or what should be taxes. And oil is similarly has a tremendous health cost as well as tremendous military costs. And I think, you know, I'm going to hit on this a little bit later, but you know, obviously the protection of the Saudi oil fields and the activities that we unfortunately got drugged through in Iraq. I mean, these are huge costs that are somehow reflected in this imbalance in some way. Even by extremely low estimates, the public health costs, fossil fuels estimated at $120 billion a year. So you kind of say, okay, if that's going on, then how do we deal with this? We either tax here or incentivize, and so this is a major policy issue that we as citizens, as a country, need to attempt to level the playing field, to let these things fall where they are with the true cost to our society. And the wind is just all caught up in all this. So this is the McKinney store. Have you coming from Texas? You haven't been to the store by any chance, have you? Okay, this is just outside the Houston, Dallas, northeast. North of Dallas, yeah, McKinney, yeah. Walmart called me in 1999 and said, hey, I heard you knew something about energy efficiency. We here at Walmart, yes, we make $10 billion a year. This is profit of $10 billion a year. We noticed that we have a $1 billion energy bill. And we here at Walmart are very, very good at keeping costs low. So the way we did that is we looked at our sales per square foot, and we would do everything to try to increase that. And the path that they were on, this was very easy, no-brainer. They thought, let's make it 200,000 square feet. Let's make it 300 square feet. Let's make it, people got lost. People didn't, and some of you may not enjoy today the Walmart shopping experience, but nevertheless, they milked that one to death. And then somebody said, hey, there's a $1 billion little bar here. Maybe we should go after it. And the guy on the other end was named, I got to know him well, was named Haji. And I said, Haji, you're calling me. I mean, salesmen die for that Walmart account. But tell me, how many hundreds or thousands of you at Walmart are concerned about that energy number? 1999. He says, just me. Are you kidding? Now, this is 1999. They have gone a long way and have hired lots of expensive consultants and done a lot of things. But what they would do is experimental stores. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. In fact, I didn't like what they did here, but they get flooded with great ideas on saving energy. And for a while, they were sending all of these people to me when I was the director of the Buildings Technology Center at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. All I have to do is sell science, to listen. If they pass the LAF test, work them towards a laboratory test. But it killed Walmart to have to go in to all the Bentonville Walmarts and continue experimenting with things that would cause problems and not heat and cool and provide lighting. So they'd try to develop a system that they struggle with daily so that they wouldn't make all these inventors mad. They would still go shop at Walmart, and they wouldn't lose the great opportunities that might be there. So they would take these experimental stores and put all the crazy ideas, at least crazy with a little filtering, into them, and then learn from that. That's not how I would do a Walmart today, nor would it be they. You do a systems, everything connects together. McKinney is an example of a Christmas tree with ornaments on it of all different types. They don't go together very well at all, but it's the way they would do it. So McKinney was one of these, and we were hired for a 4-year process to come in, put 400 sensors in, and measure all of the things that were in this. And this pole right here is the pole with a 50, which we'll have later, I'm going to show you, and right in the middle of the parking lot. And the hope was that everywhere there was a Walmart, there would be a couple of these guys sprinkled in the parking lot. Just another shot of it. And what they ended up doing, Berge is a good, they were the only ones, hundreds of maybe some of you guys recognize this, the old windmill pumps that sprinkled particularly the West, and very old. And the gentleman, I think he's pretty elderly, but he's got like 100 patents on various parts of this. And that's who Walmart was dealing with directly for this 50 kW. And it was thought that would be like a kind of a nice, decent range to be able to plop into, commercial areas that are, at least in the immediate vicinity, big flat spaces and likely to have some wind. So now at least we got something stacked on the top of that. And I will say, and I've got a bunch of plots, but I knew enough not to bring all those out. We ended up measuring, and we were measuring every 15 minutes, average every 15. We got about 40% of the expected output out of this unit. So this was, at the time, was experimental. It was supposed to produce power at starting at 7.5, not at 10 miles per hour. And I noticed in their catalog it's not offered. So I'm not sure if they sold it off or what, but it's not an option on their website. This store was built in 2005. Lots and lots of cool energy efficiency going on, about 5 different types of PV. They had a bio boiler. They were actually taking their fat and burning it in the boiler and using it to heat water and things of that sort in the store. Really neat stuff on water capture, roof runoff, parking lot runoff. They had a little bioswale. I'm going to show you a little bit of this. I thought this was kind of interesting, the idea of a little wind turbine. It lit their monument in front that said, here's Walmart. This is the entire roof. This part of the parking lot all went into the big pond. That pond had the potential of saving huge amounts of irrigation water. I will tell you that I was responsible for measuring this and was hoping to get this installed when all the other stuff got installed. I didn't get it in place in time. We had to do some design modification, and a leak occurred in this pond, and it was kept at a level with city water so that it didn't look like an ugly bottom of a pond. The savings for 10 years leaked out of the bottom of this pond. So I just say this, we're trying to do something good. Something as simple as this can just take the legs out from under you. And I don't really like telling that story, but it happened, and it's real, and these things happen. They did no turf grass. It was all, the types of vegetation that could get along with less water. And then what would happen, there's a little windmill here. The water would be taken from here and then pumped up, and this is the bioswale that water would absorb into the ground and through the selection of plants. Lots of neat stuff, but again, it was not necessarily directly energy related. And that's a picture of the little mill. Your Walmart associates had a nice place to break. This was just a picture of how the plumbing from the roofs into the wetlands that they did that for.
What caused that to leak?
I can't tell you how it got the leak. This is a membrane, and apparently it was supposed to be sealed, and apparently it had been checked, and then somehow somebody had to go out there or fix a pump or something, and in the course of doing it, a hole was opened. I don't know, but
in Arkansas, if you go low tech, they used to take hogs and dig a hole, and there'd be clay and stuff, and put straw in there and let the hogs work that out, and that thing wouldn't leak water.
Very cool.
True story.
Very cool. Another thing you do with ponds is, when people rip off the EPDM membranes and all these, it's a huge waste problem, but they're perfect for deterring, sealing up, ponds, and they can take a little spillage. A little bit is not. It's certainly better than very porous soils, but that's fascinating. That's very fascinating. And maybe should be done. I'd love to have the, what we call this? It's not a herd of pigs.
Make the pond and then sell the hogs.
Yeah. Well, they had mulch. They would compost all their waste and then send it. It wasn't done on site, but it was sent very close. Put it into bags and then sold. They had in Chicago. I worked on green roof, which green roof meant growing stuff, and they would do it in pots. And so they'd actually buy smaller pots, and then as they began to grow, they would take them down and put them on the land and sell them, and then recycle. So there's But I can go on. I mean, these guys were so fun to hang with. The condensate from the refrigerating capability that was in their bar was all this water, and it was really clean water. So somebody said, well, let's put it into the carbonation system and make Cokes and Pepsis with it. So here is absolutely pure water, very clean, and it's all kept sanitized now, so it's not the Legionnaire's disease growing on it or anything. It's all kept. It would go into the carbonation. It wouldn't carbonate. And you kind of step back and you just go, okay, I got perfectly clean water, and that doesn't make soda. So you got to have dirty water to make soda? You know, if you ever needed a reason to stop drinking soda, that was kind of the finding from that, which is kind of surprising. These are just some of the bragging things and things that this store did. Waterless urinals, and I'm getting away from the wind story, and I don't mean to do that, but it was surrounded with lots of good, interesting, fun things to measure and see. That's what they were hoping to get on the unit. They got half of that. They were hoping that would generate down to 4.5 lower wind speed, and that's like I say, that's where the work's being done. The average wind speed in McKinney was pretty decent compared to here, 10 miles per hour. This was one that just lit up a monument sign where they got 2,000 kilowatt hours per year, and that pump that I showed you was about 1,000. Kind of fun. But now it's closer to home, if you will. And I didn't know who was going to show up for this, but you know, if we had a little bit better winds, here's if this works. If you ought to think about this, this is what you ought to have. You know, and this is not a super energy efficient house like we were talking about. I think you could cut this. You know, the 5 kind of range I think would be decent for a really efficient house in our area if we had the wind. So you're probably talking, you know, $20,000, pushing $20,000 for a wind system. To make this work, your cost of electricity should be in the neighborhood of 12 cents. Ours is a little bit less than that, 9.5. The average wind speed should be 10, and this converts to a class that DOE talks about, and of about 2, and you need some space. They can be guy wire towers, and it's not much different than I've seen in the middle of cities, you know, some pretty tall towers with guide wires for the old ham radio operators, and some of these smaller units, that's all you're talking about as far as getting them up. If you live in an area that is not too hilly, then those DOE, and I already made this point, that the wind resource maps are pretty good, but you know, the big concern that we had here in our area is that we're being overlooked, or we're overlooking our wind resource. And the thing that you're encouraged to do is a one-year survey. And that's an expense, both in hardware, and there's a couple of groups, including the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy out of Knoxville, that got a grant, got some of this equipment, and actually rent it out. So if you should have a site that has some, you know, intuitively you think it's a pretty good site, it may be that you can actually get your hands on some of this equipment, and it's not much. An anemometer's thing that, you know, kids can make, very, very inexpensive. But getting it up so it doesn't fall on somebody is a little more expensive to do and do correctly. But that's what you want to have. And if you do have to hire this, there are entities that will come and set up a rig and collect the data, and sometimes you can be pushing, you know, $1,000 for determining. Well, there are equations that, you know, in fact, we would do stuff like right on the roof, and we would try to extrapolate. But you want to get up, you know, 100 feet if you can, and then from that make an educated, you know, what it would be if you were, you know, any higher. But there's a lot of disturbance, and when we do stuff with measuring the performance of roofs, we can be getting much different 10 foot off a roof on this side than we can on that. So that goes away the further we get from our turbulent airflow that occurs from, you know, trees. And if you do have tall trees, you know, you might want to even get higher. So as far as, you know, kind of good sources, probably the best single book would be this Paul Gipe on wind power for home and business. It's a little bit, you know, 10-year-old book, but very, very good. And here is your major wind, if you will, lobbying and information as far as staying current. This is the association that does that. And they've got a nice newsletter, and like I say, the whole issue that's going on is very, very elevated discussion at the federal level. The wind advocate and, you know, where this is going to fall. So that's what I prepared on wind. I really kind of was going to tell you, I don't